Good afternoon. My name is Mark Kieft. I'm the Safety Information Section Manager here at the BASA. Thank you very much. Glad to be appreciated. But also one of my main roles in certification is the coordination of international matters with our international colleagues who work in the SM Directorate. I'm going to talk to you today about the existing BASAs, upcoming BASAs, or the BASAs that are under negotiation at the moment, and also other possibilities to reduce duplication in validation of foreign designs. We'll concentrate on BASAs in this presentation because BASAs allow us to accept or validate foreign certificates, whereas no other tool is available to do that. Why? Why do we have international agreements? It's mainly to protect citizen safety. Our citizens fly with operators on aircraft all over the world, not only within Europe, not only on European products. We mainly have bilateral agreements for citizen safety. It ensures that we know what our partner countries are up to and allows us to monitor, have continued confidence in our partner countries. Also, of course, is to support EU industry. EU industry has a lot of dealings with our partner countries and cutting down on duplication of certification activities, as well as other aspects of the bilaterals, brings about cost savings for our applicants, for our industry. Just a disclaimer on this presentation. I'm only talking about the Annex 1 or Annex A of the bilateral agreements that are in place. I'm only talking about initial airworthiness. We're not talking about any other of the annexes that are being negotiated or that are in place, like maintenance or flight crew licensing. Just talking about the initial airworthiness, Annex 1, Annex A scenarios. A lot of this presentation is about the USA. This is because, of course, the bulk of our validation work is with the USA. We do a lot of work with the USA, Airbus, Boeing. There's a lot of work ongoing in this area. So on the USA, recent updates, the BOB decisions. So the BOB is a body formed at political level which can make decisions and uphold the agreement. The BOB can make decisions which amend the agreement. A couple of decisions that are coming out or in the process of being issued at the moment, BOB Decision 8. BOB Decision 8 is a decision which links the reduction in validation activity with the reduction of fees. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't help European industry very much because the FAA doesn't charge fees, but it helps the US industry when we are charging Boeing, for instance, for validating changes or designs. So when both parties have reduced the level of validation activity, then the fees can be reduced. And this BOB decision brings about the mechanism to do that. This was signed already in June 2018, and it's in force already. BOB Decision 9 is the next decision, which is in the process of being negotiated and finalized at the moment. This is removing the list of EU NAAs from the Annex 1 of the bilateral. So in the US-EU bilateral agreement, today there is a list of all the member states of Europe in the appendix to the annex. This appendix gives certain privileges, if you like, to certain countries. This is not fair. We have a European system. The European system is common across all of Europe. So therefore, the same privileges, the same rights should exist for all EU countries. BOB 9 is removing this list and just making it clear that because of the one system in Europe, all have the same privileges. To go hand in hand with that, of course, we needed to improve, well, not improve, but clarify mutual acceptance of each other's certificates, and also to ensure the mutual confidence. So there's some wording being added in Bob Decision 9 which will ensure mutual confidence of each other's systems. The VIR, the Validation Improvement Roadmap. The FAA and the EASA have assigned this document. This document is to reduce the level of validation that we both perform on each other's activities. One party certifies, the second party validates. It shouldn't be 100% validation of what the certifying party did. This validation roadmap is a step-by-step approach to reduce the level of validation. It has an objective by 2022, which is not so far away, to reduce the validation effort, which is time and costs, to a level of 20% compared with the first tip in 2011. So over a 10-year period, to reduce the level of validation effort that the EASA does on FAA certifications, or the FAA does on the EASA certifications, down to 20%. It's quite aggressive, as you can imagine, and already many steps of this validation improvement roadmap have happened already. The main reason, of course, is to reduce duplication. We don't want to duplicate what our trusted partner, the FAA, does already. The FAA does not want to duplicate what we do already. It's a waste of time. They should concentrate on the deltas, on the differences. So the VIR was already approved in 2016 and has gone through various amendments, the last signed in August this year, just to update some tasks. So what drove this VIR? We are under a risk-based approach trying to maximize full acceptance of the validating authority without any technical review. So what does this mean? We are trying to drive towards more directly accepted approvals, where approval issued in the USA would be accepted in Europe without any further investigation at all, no certificate issued. More basic changes where the validation authority is not involved. This is called streamlined validation, where all the validating authority does is issue a certificate without any technical input. And less involvement in basic changes, which is the remainder, where the validating authority has to be involved in some level, but less involvement and much clearer involvement in those changes. One of the changes which has introduced some of these VIR principles is TIP Revision 6. TIP Revision 6 has been in place since March this year, and it brings about better validation principles, clearer validation principles. There was an amendment to TIP 6 signed recently in June to correct some anomalies in the existing TIP. So some details on TIP Revision 6. These, as I said, these bring about the three paths of validating: accepted, streamlined validation for basic changes, and technical validation for non-basic changes. I'll go into more detail in these in a minute, but the three routes are accepted, no work by the validating authority; streamlined validation, where there's no work by the validating authority apart from issuing a certificate; and technical validation, where there's a work plan to manage the validation process. The non-accepted basic changes are classified as basic or non-basic. The TIP Revision 6 clearly lays down what is a basic and non-basic change. It's now very clear for all people what is basic and non-basic. There's 10 criteria listed, including safety emphasis items. Non-basic changes are validated according to a validation work plan. The validation work plan is very clear. It says the validating authority needs these things doing, and the certifying authority will do them on his behalf. It's clear to the applicant, it's clear to both authorities what the extra validation items are. Okay, so there's no guessing about, well, now I need to see this document at the end of the process. No, the validation work plan contains all the documents that need to be looked at. The difficulties identified within the validation will be escalated. So not just within our two authorities, between the FAA and the BASA, if we notice there's problems with the validation system, we will raise it to this group called the CMT. The CMT is the certification management team, and it's a group of the four major authorities in the world: ANAC Brazil, Transport Canada, FAA, and EASA, who meet occasionally and set policy, including driving reduced validation. So any difficulties encountered, it now says in the tip that these will be escalated to the CMT. Now, on the first of the three methods to bring about validation is the acceptance. The acceptance is no application. There is no VA approval. There is no fee. Okay? Something done in one of the jurisdictions is instantly valid in the other jurisdiction. There is no application, there is no fee, there is no work by the validating authority. At the moment, tip 6, and this is of course going to be expanded when there's more others, the validation roadmap goes further and further. Tip 6 has basic changes by the TC and STC holder when there's no effect on the issued certificate. In other words, when the certificate doesn't have to be reissued. All major changes are accepted. All TSO and ETSO articles, all non-critical PMA parts, all repairs, and all non-critical alterations. All these, if approved by the FAA, are automatically approved in Europe and vice versa. The streamlined validation is the case where the VA just issues a certificate. All the technical work is done by the certifying authority, but the VA just issues their certificate. There's no technical input at all. So there's an application to the VA because the certificate has to be issued, but there's no VA technical involvement. The VA issues a certificate. There's a reduced fee in our system, in the EASA system, and the maximum approval period is set by the tip. It has to be done in a certain period. The validating authority can't take 4 months, 6 months, 10 months to do the job. They have days to do the job. All they are doing is issuing a certificate. There's no technical activity. So basic changes by the TC and STC holder where there is an effect on the certificate come under the streamlined validation, as well as most new and changed TC and STCs for engines and propellers, piston engines and propellers, and all other basic items, which is a bit of a catch-all because the basic criteria are clearly written in the tip, and I'm not going to list all the other basic items, but if you don't meet the non-basic criteria, it's a basic item. By the way, the non-basic criteria are always being refined to be lower and lower, driving more to basic changes. It's always the aim to drive more acceptance, more streamlined validation, more basic changes. It's always the aim of the validation improvement roadmap. For non-basic, this is where the validating authority is technically involved. So there's an application to the validating authority. A predefined validating authority technical involvement, predefined, the tip lays down what should be the VA involvement. The VA in the end issues a certificate. There's reducing fees based on the reducing involvement. I already mentioned BOB Decision 8. As there's a reducing involvement of the both validating authorities, there'll be reducing fees linked to that. The application for validation for all other TCs. So this is what has to go through the non-basic route. There's an for all other TCs, major changes in STCs when the criteria are met, as defined in the tip, like the SEIs or new technology, and establishes a validation work plan. Now, the validation work plan, as I already said, is quite clear that this is what is meant to be done on behalf of the validating authority. So the applicant knows, the validating authority knows, the certifying authority knows. There shouldn't be any surprises outside these changes. I've already mentioned safety emphasis items. This is a rather new concept. introduced again in Tip 6, this is where the authority says, I want to be involved in these safety emphasis items. The validating authority says, if you come across this sort of project, I want to be involved in these items. And there's been lists created for each of the product groups, for general aviation, for large aircraft, for rotorcraft, etc. So there's been lists created by both authorities. The FAA has provided their list, EASA has provided their list, and these lists are being used to set the non-basic criteria. If an item is on the SEI list, it becomes non-basic. Now, this is the first attempt. This has never been done before in the world, and of course there are some differences between the lists. It's recognized that EASA and FAA haven't achieved the same level on some of the product categories, and even across product categories, there's more SEIs for GA than there is for large aircraft, which doesn't make sense. So, if we're looking at safety emphasis items, it should be rather logical that there are more items on the larger aircraft, but as an example. So these are being looked at and will be refined, again, always with the aim to reduce the number of safety emphasis items, to force more projects into being basic, so there's less validating authority activity. Consistency is the big key to these SEI lists. Once the SEI lists are more consistent, it'll be a fairer system for both parties. Future tip revisions. According to the VIR, of course, the future revisions will reduce the number of criteria for non-basic, reduce the number of SEIs, and extend the concept of basic TCs to other product categories, always driving down the level of involvement of the validating authority. The intention is always to reduce the level of involvement of the validating authority. The implementation Tip 6 and future revisions will be a success if industry support this. What do we mean by this? As an example, if the TC holder makes some basic changes and doesn't comply with the tip, then our partners will be looking at this and saying, well, your industry is not complying with the tip. We have to ensure that we comply with the tip. Our DOAs, our industry complies with the tip, which will build up confidence to drive the validation roadmap into less and less validation activity. This is an example where in the tip at the moment, I'm not going to read all this paragraph, but the basis of this paragraph is the certifying authority will approve these changes in accordance with its own procedures against the certification basis of both the CA and the VA. So for basic accepted changes in our system, where the DOA is involved in this activity, the DOA should show compliance against the certification basis of the CA, of us, EASA, and of the FAA. If the basis of the FAA is different, there has to be compliance shown against the FAA requirements. Unfortunately, since this process has been in place, we've both the FAA and us have done some spot checks, and we noticed that not only DOAs, but also in the US industry, are not showing compliance against both the certification authority's requirements and the validation authority's requirements. This means that, unfortunately, changes that do not show the VA compliance cannot be considered approved by the VA. We're in a situation that the tip allows or brings about streamlined validation or acceptance of changes, and because compliance is not shown against the validation authority's certification basis, that means it's not acceptable in accordance with the tip. That change which should be acceptable in accordance with the tip is not acceptable in accordance with the tip, because it doesn't show compliance with the VA certification basis. So, EASA and the FAA have been discussing this, and that's why we're raising this subject here today. We have to ensure that we show compliance with the VA certification specifications, or certification, I forget the word, basis. Thank you very much. Certification basis. The certification basis of the CA is not the same as the certification basis of the VA. As we saw on the previous slide, the VACB is equals the CACB plus blah, blah, blah. So you can see there's differences. The certification basis of the two is not the same. If you want your change to be accepted in the other system, in the US system, it has to show compliance with what the FAA want to see. It has to be, and vice versa. If US industry want to have acceptance under the TIP for their changes, it has to show compliance with what EASA wants. So EASA encourages the DOAs to have procedures in their handbook to cover this aspect. And indeed, I'm not going to take feedback now, but DAH, your feedback is sought. The approval holders' feedback is sought on this, because it's not a non-compliance with the regulations if you don't do this, but it means that your repair, your change will not be accepted in the USA. So the suggestion by the DOA team is to have in your procedure manual, in your handbook, a process for this dual acceptance or dual streamlined validation to allow to show compliance with the validation authority's certification basis, with the FAA certification basis. And this will be discussed, and its definition as implementation as a side activity during DOA audits. It cannot be audited because it's not part of the regulation, but it'll be discussed as a side activity to ensure that we are happy with the way that's been implemented. For Decision 8, I've already mentioned this a little bit, it's about fees reduction. It's about reducing fees that EASA charges to US industry when both parties, both EASA and FAA, have reduced the level of validation down to the 20%. It basically LOI down, fees down. That's the key message for this. One of the big things about the Bob Decision 8, it lays the framework. It lays the framework for this to happen, but it doesn't bring about any fee reductions today. There has to be further Bob decisions, and there's one in process at the moment called 8.1. It'll be 8.1, 8.2 for the future for further fee reductions. There's 8.1 is in process at the moment, which will bring about fee reductions for basic STCs and changes. So to conclude on the USA, there's a lot on the USA, I apologize for that. Tip 6 allows authorities to refocus their limited resources on the states where we have higher concerns. We are trusted partners with the USA. We trust them, they trust us. We should not be validating or spending time validating something that's done well when it was certified. That is a waste of resource. But, of course, we have to show compliance. We, the European system, has to show compliance where required with the FAA requirements for validation. We have to do that. And the US industry has to show compliance with our requirements when they certify something. Okay, so that's the message that I want to take home from the USA part of this, that we have to, where there's this streamlined validation, we have to show compliance with the FAA requirements, the additional FAA requirements. Canada. With Canada, we're not so advanced as we are with the USA, and indeed we don't have so much work with them as we do with the USA. So there's less presentation on Canada, you'll be glad to hear. Recent changes that have happened in TIP Revision 3, which is last year already, it incorporated implementation of process for the maintenance of confidence. All the TIPs at the moment are going through this process of being amended to include maintenance of confidence principles. Because without maintenance of confidence, we had initial confidence when the bilateral was signed. Without maintenance of confidence principles, we don't know what the other partner is doing. So all the TIPs are going through this process. TIP Revision 3 was for Canada, and it introduced this maintenance of confidence principles. It strengthened the collaboration on the continued airworthiness responsibilities and the provisional application of the TIP to EFTA states, so that the EASA member states that are not EU member states. It extended the TIP validity to those states. Future changes that are happening with the Canadian documents. TIP Revision 4 is coming, and it is going to bring about mutual acceptance of MRB activities. MRB activities, as you probably know, are quite time-consuming, and this change will, like with the USA's TIP, bring about full mutual acceptance of MRB activities. That means EASA will no longer be involved in any Canadian products' MRB activities, and Transport Canada will no longer be involved in any European products' MRB activities, like the same with the USA. A validation improvement roadmap is being drafted also with the Canadians under a risk-based approach for the same reason, to bring about the principles of accepted, streamlined and validation work plan. The same principles are being introduced, and the validation and improvement roadmap will again have deadlines to bring about this reduction in validation activity. Brazil. This is the last country that has a BASA in place with the European Union at the moment. And rather simple, there's just one slide on this. TIP Revision 3 entered force in 2017. It introduced the OSD provisions for validations. The next revision in 2019, and this is the shopping list of things that we're hoping to address in the TIP Revision 4, which will happen next year. It doesn't mean these things are going to happen. I mean, for sure, the maintenance of confidence will be a cut and paste from the other TIPs, but the other aspects, this is a shopping list of things we hope to achieve by that time. New BASAs, China. So this is a negotiation. We are not yet at a stage where the BASA is in place. The bilateral agreement with China is not yet in place. It is a negotiation. And we are at the stage of this. There's been 4 meetings to negotiate the agreement and the annex on initial airworthiness already. The final one was in 2017, September 2017. During this round, the text of the agreement and Annex 1 on certification initial airworthiness was agreed, which was good news because it took quite a lot of effort to get to that point. And finally, the text was initialed, which means that both parties agreed with the text and initialed it in December 2017. Unfortunately, since then, it's got a bit slower. I'll come to that in a second. But the appendix, Annex 1, contains the modalities of the agreement. Well, this is a nice way of saying that the confidence we have in each other's systems is not the same. China's been accepting EU products for years. We haven't yet in Europe accepted a Chinese product. So there's a difference in the confidence levels between the 2 parties. And the modalities of that are contained in the Annex 1 on certification. The parties have not yet officially signed the bilateral. It hasn't happened yet. It is still TBD. It's not known when this is going to be. The various dates have come and gone. Various dates have been proposed for the future, but unfortunately, both parties are not yet quite at the stage to sign the agreement. When it is going to be signed, and by the way, the agreement only contains Annex 1 on certification. It doesn't contain any annex on maintenance or any other aspects. It's only certification. When it is signed, then it will go to the European Parliament for their consent, and then to the Council. Then there's exchange of diplomatic notes, and then there's the first meetings of the BOB, the Bilateral Oversight Board, and the COB, the Certification Oversight Board. And then in parallel, the TIP is being drafted. So the best estimate for when this will be in place and the TIP will be in place will be the first or second quarter 2019. That's the best estimate, if it's signed soon. Japan. We're also negotiating a BASA with Japan. This is the last negotiation, so we have 3 BASAs in place, Brazil, USA, and Canada, and we have 2 negotiations in place, China and Japan. Japan, the 5th round of negotiations and on the agreement and Annex 1 on airworthiness certification were held in Tokyo, and the next round is in December in Brussels. Expect finalization of the negotiations in mid-2019, so it's a little bit behind the Chinese BASA in the negotiation phase. But the confidence building process has happened. Everyone's happy with each other's work. And again, the modalities of the agreement, we don't accept Japanese aircraft today, so the BASA is not going to say that we will, but they accept European aircraft. So again, it's not exactly a, the agreement is not fully symmetrical. Future possibilities. My colleague here told me to be careful with this bit. Michaela gave a presentation this morning on the new basic regulation. The new basic regulation contains many new possibilities. And one possibility that it contains is this article to deal with, the article's on the next slide, Article 68, to deal with the acceptance of foreign certificates. Now, the problem we have, and the reason that this article was created, is because mandates to enter into BASAs are politically driven. There are countries out there that manufacture aircraft, design and manufacture aircraft, where we don't or could not have a bilateral in place because of the political differences. Whatever those political differences are, bilateral is not going to happen while the political differences are in place. It's a political process. So without a BASA being in place, EASA has to apply Part 21 in full. We have to do a certification activity like we are stated design. We have to issue a TC. We have to manage the continued airworthiness of the aircraft. We in fact create a parallel system to the stated design's own system, which is not a logical thing to do. We have two states acting as stated design for the same product. It's not a logical thing to do. So this was recognized, and this is why this provision was created in the new bilateral. It wasn't just created, by the way, for certification. It allows the EC, the European Commission, to adopt rules on acceptance of foreign certificates. It allows, in theory, the European Commission can accept a foreign system, whatever the system is, pilot licenses, air traffic control, whatever the system is in the future, it allows the European Commission to accept that system by introducing new rules. Of course, EASA will be involved. We will have to do the technical evaluation. We'll have to do the assessment to build the initial confidence and the continued confidence in the system. But after that, the Commission may adopt delegated acts which gives rules to accept the foreign certificates. So this is another way forward outside the BASA route in the future. We have no idea if it'll be used. We don't think it will in the short term for sure, but nevertheless, it's an option that's available. Okay, I come to the end of my presentation. Many thanks indeed. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Are there any questions directly from the floor before we go to the questions on Slido? I think there are a number of questions that are similar and they are more or less asking for clarification. For example, are all EASA minor changes are accepted by the FAA without any further input or action?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, minor changes have been accepted since, I think, version 5 or maybe even 4. Minors are accepted by each other, by the FAA without exception. And vice versa, the FAA accepts EASA-approved minor changes, whether from a DOA or from EASA directly, without exception.
There was one question that is quite interesting because oh, no, you changed the order, wait. Yeah, programs that started before the implementation of TIP Revision 6, can they benefit from the new provisions or not? That is marked.
No. That's the simple answer. That's the simple answer. Because if you are validating something in accordance with the work plan is created before the process starts, not at the end. We end up in the situation where a program halfway through, what's the work plan? There is no work plan. It doesn't exist. So it's always best to, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much more difficult to agree the validation items up front rather than at the end of the program.
One question was how EASA and FAA make sure that we both apply the process in the same way, so a post-validation review to determine the value added for each exercise.
Indeed, and I mentioned maintenance of confidence. This is something that we've, in fact, been discussing with the FAA even this week. We are looking at ways of documenting our confidence in each other's systems, whether it'll be on a sort of dashboard that we'll share or some other method that we can show that how we will be happy with each other's work. Now, this could involve sampling a certain percentage of validated items or items that were validated by the other party on our behalf, or it could be in various other ways like sharing of information. We're working on those metrics. That is very vital to have a system in place to be happy with the other partners' progress on implementation.
The next one is a bit more technical. Will EASA accept and review a dual cert basis, so for the certification authority and the validating authority, for an anticipated STC validation during the STC approval process? So when we get the application for the EASA STC, can they at the same time apply for and show compliance to the validating requirements?
It's not an easy question to answer because some STCs, as we already said, are already accepted. They're already accepted if they're done by basic STCs and changes done by the TC holder and STC holder are automatically accepted. Non-basic changes go through the Streamlined method where the validating authority is not involved. So I have difficulty in understanding the question, sorry.
Yes.
Dominique Bouvier, Safran Aircraft Engine. One question related to the Russian authorities. You know that the Russian Federation has created a new authority, FATA, and doesn't recognize anymore IACA. And we are expecting, if no BASA can be established, I think it's not yet possible, but to reconduct the existing arrangement by product, when they are existing, in order to continue the relation with the Russian authority and Russian customer. Do you have a plan for management, for creation of a new arrangement or recognition of new arrangement or BASA? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. You're exactly right. IAC is no longer the competent authority for certification in the Russian Federation. FATA is the competent authority. Because of this change, EASA has taken various actions. We are asking FATA to come to renegotiate their working arrangement with us. Sorry, YAC. We are asking YAC to come and renegotiate their working arrangement with us because their working arrangement covers the certification of aircraft, which is now limited to non-Russian states. And in parallel, we're also working on a working arrangement and an assessment of FATA, the new authority in Russia. We've already conducted confidence building exercises with them, and we have another one to go. They visited us also and looked at our system because, of course, they wanted to understand how the EASA system works compared to their system. And we will be conducting a working arrangement with them. But unfortunately, because it's a working arrangement, it doesn't bring about any acceptance of the Russian certificates. It doesn't do that. Working arrangements cannot do that. It can define where we are happier, and therefore we can apply LOI principles, but it does not allow us to accept Russian certificates.
Hi, Nigel Wright from Airbus Helicopters UK again. Do you anticipate a day when all work will be by direct acceptance with no validation?
I doubt it. There's always, we're going to have a presentation, I think, on new technologies and how to certify new technologies. I can imagine when the first supersonic, or the next supersonic aircraft, is certified, for sure us as the validating authority will have a high interest in certain aspects. When the first urban mobility vehicle is certified, I'm sure that the other partner will want to be involved in that activity. So with new technologies or new types of product, I can't ever see it being complete trust of the certifying authority and no involvement of the validation authority. But for legacy designs, let's put it that way, on rather new, by the way, beautiful aircraft that are being produced, but when there's no new technology, I can imagine that reducing down to a minimum level.
Okay, one more in the back.
Hello, hi. Jake Biggs with Textron Aviation. Do you foresee any issues with the FAA accepting ADS-B out changes as minor changes in type design while EASA considers it major?
As part of the confidence building metrics I was talking about, of course, we will be checking that we are both applying the major minor classification in the normal way. We've been accepting minor changes from the FAA and vice versa for some time now, and there's very few concerns about one party would classify it a different way than the other. It's quite clear in the tip what would be a minor, what is not a minor. So I don't foresee any problems with that. The basic, non-basic is the next step, of course, and that gets a little more complicated because it's a new area for all our certification people, whether it should be non-basic or basic. But we don't foresee any concerns, but we are putting in place metrics to measure exactly that.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? Otherwise, thanks to Mark.